I'd like to introduce our eminent panelists, and before that, I want to say the communication for big impact is here for 5 women. Um, so, first of all, invite Ms. Priyanka Dutt. She's the country director in India for BBC Media Action. Many of you might have had interactions with her. BBC Media Action uses the power of media and communications to help people transform their lives. Priyanka has been over 18 years working in this field, and she has worked extensively on social and behavior change communication programs. She currently provides strategic leadership across multiple communication projects on maternal and child health, gender empowerment, water sanitation, using diverse platforms such as television, radio, mobile, community outreach, and interpersonal communication. Priyanka, of course, has won several Indian and international awards, including a GSMA Global Mobile Award, a Commonwealth Broadcasting Association Award, Indian Tele Award, Global Health Award, and Vodafone Mobile for Good Award, among others. So I invite Priyanka now to give us a...
This isn't as easy as it looks. Little bit of rearrangement.
Just
I'm not sure
one small thing, sorry. We'll have 10 minutes from each speaker, and I'll try to indicate if you're going over time. And then we'll open the floor for discussions, okay?
Thanks very much, Vimla. I hope everybody can hear me. I want to talk a little bit, I want to tell you a story actually, a story that's set in a little village called Tikamgarh in Madhya Pradesh. It's a village with a tribal population, under 1,000 people. It's really, really small. No electricity, no TV, no radio. It's one of those places where time warps and it goes into a different century entirely. And Tikamgarh is one of 110 listeners' villages that BBC Media Action established under its Google Foundation-funded Prevention of Bonded Labor project. This is in 2014. And the idea of setting up these listeners' villages was to provide information and to promote sort of collective action or collective efficacy among people most vulnerable to being bonded. And the story I'd like to tell you is about a couple, Ramcharan Adivasi and his family, actually, more than just his wife, who live in Tikamgarh. Now, Ramcharan Adivasi has 2 adult sons who, along with 10 other young men from the village, went off to Uttar Pradesh to work in the brick kilns. They left hoping to make more money than they had the opportunity to do back in Tikamgarh. But days, weeks, and months went by, and Ramcharan Adivasi and his wife hadn't heard from their sons, and neither had the other families in the village. And it was at this stage that Ramcharan's wife went along to a group in the village that was listening to a BBC Media Action radio program called Majboor Kisko Bola, or Who Are You Calling Helpless? It was her first time at this group, but over 50% of the village joined this activity every single week to learn more about their own rights and entitlements related particularly to labor. The group facilitator was from one of our partner NGOs, and he brought a radio set that was given to him as part of this project along, and every week he played through that radio set this radio program for the people in the village. And in listening to that radio program, Ramcharan's wife learned that in all likelihood, her sons and these other young men in the village were probably in a bonded labor situation. Now, while listening, she heard through the program a phone number. Now, we had added this phone number into the program more as a feedback mechanism for people to call us and tell us what they thought of the show, add their ideas. And we got a lot of that. We got a lot of songs and jokes and feedback about characters. But this was the first time that we received a distress call. And the distress call basically said, I don't know what to do. Help us. Now, BBC Media Action is a communications organization. We're not an organization that works in rescue and rehabilitation. So we got in touch immediately with our NGO partners on the ground in Tikamgarh, and we gave them all the information that we had got from Ramcharan Adivasi's wife. And the NGO partner took those details of the case and went to the district administration. And at the same time, what they did is that they got in touch with the district press. Now, these were journalists who had been trained to report on bonded labor issues also as a part of this project. The media, of course, jumped on the story, interviewing Ramcharan and his wife, interviewing the district magistrate. And with that pressure from the community, from civil society organizations, and from the media, the district magistrate took action and called his counterpart in UP, where the men from Tikamgarh were last known to have been. And after weeks of raids and government crackdowns on that particular brick kiln where they were supposed to have been, they were finally found and rescued. Unfortunately, Ramcharan Adivasi's 2 sons were not among the men rescued. There still is no information about where they are. But in that year that Majboor Kisko Bola ran, over 200 people were rescued from bonded labor because somebody in their community listened to this program. The journalists who got involved were among 100 journalists at the district level who were trained by the program, and together they produced over 400 articles on labor issues in that particular year. And these were journalists who were trained sort of side by side alongside the NGO partners that we worked with. And those NGO partners are the critical last mile delivery system for the program. And those relationships that have been created through that training between journalists and the NGOs that work on the ground mean that there are really strong relationships there between civil society and the media. So now the media actually has reliable sources of information, and the media and NGOs have a network among the media that they can actually access and build on. But actually, this is a story of collective action, one in which there are multiple stakeholders and everyone is a partner. And in an effort to bring listeners or communities closer to the government, the program established another platform. We called them Shrota Samvads, or listeners' dialogue events. And it was basically a big ground event where people who listened to the program were invited to come in and had an opportunity one-on-one to talk to their district administration. Over 6,000 people attended those 6 Shrota Samvads that we did in the program and registered over 3,000 grievances about the lack of public facilities, or widows who hadn't received their pensions, or job card applications, a whole range of different issues. Gyanendra, who's a colleague of ours from one of our NGO partners, Samarthan, told us that he and his team had worked for years in the community to talk to people and engage them about their rights. But until they had heard Majboor Kisko Bola, people in the community hadn't actually connected with the issues emotionally. They hadn't known about the minimum wage, so it worked for less than 100 rupees a day. But now they earn the Madhya Pradesh minimum wage of 146 rupees a day because they demand it. And Gyanendra says to us that Majboor Kisko Bola has given them knowledge, the evidence that it actually works to work collectively, and the confidence to work together to demand their rights. The research that we did on Majboor Kisko Bola actually bears this out, and it shows that Majboor Kisko Bola was highly effective in increasing knowledge, in shifting attitudes, in improving risk perception, but most critically, it was successful in embedding collective efficacy within communities. So 61% of those who listen to Majboor Kisko Bola feel that within their own community, people should encourage each other to fight for their rights, as opposed to just 47% among non-listeners. And 61% of Majboor Kisko Bola listeners could state at least 3 clear labor rights violations, as opposed to just 32% amongst non-listeners. Building up, of course, to the true testament of the power of a simple platform that was designed to reach people who are unreached and to create change in media dark and often forgotten communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Priyanka. That was about 8 minutes. Excellent. So let me, I have the pleasure of introducing Caroline Dendulk. She has over 25 years of work experience, of which 20 years in the context of development cooperation in 5 different countries, working with UN organizations as well as non-governmental and bilateral aid organizations. She has focused her career in the areas of advocacy, communication, change management, and partnership. As Chief Communication Person she leads the public and policy advocacy work for UNICEF in India, engaging with civil society, young people, the media, and corporate sector to create social change in key areas for UNICEF, which is reducing neonatal death, stunting, and opentification, ensuring all children are in school and learning, protect children from violence, child labor, and child marriage. Over the years, specialized in the areas of advocacy, communication and external relations, partnership and fundraising, organizational change and development, Carolyn now will share her experiences.
It isn't as easy indeed. Thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me well. I also have a small clip while I'm speaking, so I hope that's ready to go at some point. Okay, thanks. So I wanted to really start this afternoon by sharing two quotes that have really struck me, having been here now almost 4.5 years in India. The first one is from Noam Chomsky, and I quote, "What is really striking me is the indifference of privileged sectors to the misery of others. You walk through Delhi and cannot miss it, but people just don't seem to see it." Another quote from Harsh Mander, "A dispassionate external observer would be bewildered by the middle class India's capacity to look away when confronted with enormous injustice and suffering, by our society's cultural comfort with inequality." Hard-hitting quotes, but also not unknown or unusual to many of us. For the issues that UNICEF is working on in India, and you already mentioned some of those, but issues like violence against children, stunting, malnutrition, and ending open defecation, these kind of quotes are core, but also present a huge challenge to the type of work we do and the role of communication. So what I wanted to share with you today is how UNICEF has worked over the past 2 to 3 years to look at these issues through a different lens when we do our communication, through the lens of inequities in countries, and how can we best engage and influence to really create a change needed. The story is very much about connecting the dots, to break down the often very high walls that we have created between communication for development, or anything we call behavior change communication, IEC, social change, and the other side, public policy advocacy. We really need to start connecting the dots if we want to tackle the quotes that I started off with. And then we can build a powerful approach that can help to address all these different spheres of influence. I wanted to bring the story alive by citing the work we've done in one of the most complex social challenges I think we have in India, around open defecation. A challenge that affects so many people, young and old, across the different socioeconomic strata, across caste, gender, religions. Also an issue that, if solved, could be a game changer for many other issues, be it education, be it nutrition, and also protection. But despite this very big complexity around an issue of open defecation, you can also actually really summarize it in a very simple one paragraph. At the moment in India, 564 million people do not use a toilet and defecate in the open. This also means that the other half of the population, that's what we're talking about, actually does have a toilet and probably uses it, but hasn't gone out on the streets to say, this is not an acceptable situation for the other half of the population. And that is back to the quote I just shared. Open defecation is too easy an issue for those who have a toilet and who use a toilet to park it away with those who are invisible and make the issue of open defecation by itself magically invisible, which is almost impossible actually. So to see how do we now tackle something like this with a different way of connecting dots between different spheres of influence and change, that's where I want to show a short clip that does that better than I would talk about it. So that little clip describes a different way of looking at how do we connect the dots between the different types of communication and influencing that we can actually do. And for the issue of open defecation, from here, beyond all the work that's already happening around communication for development, communication for change, the actual technical interventions and programs that are there on the ground, we also felt we needed to start focusing on that other half of the population. People who do have a toilet, who use it, but don't necessarily raise their voice or use the power of their voice, because that's what they have, and I'm actually referring probably to you because you're part of this target group. So we decided to focus on that group, and that group is predominantly also a very young, urban, middle class group of people. So we started to designing a campaign that had a very different look and feel to it, called Take Poo to the Loo. I don't know if you've heard about it. It ran a year or two ago as well. It was a fun campaign. It was really raising the awareness on an issue that was not being talked about. And the mere purpose of the campaign was not to push everybody immediately to go and build and ask and demand toilets and use them, but rather to get this as a topic to be talked about, to eventually push that demand elsewhere in society. So we had a whole campaign. I'm not going to take you through the campaign itself, but I just wanted to highlight some lessons learned from us for us that were very important. Beyond the fact that we had the usual quite good reach, good engagement on all digital channels. It was a completely online campaign. From the evaluation that we did afterwards, we did learn a few things that for me stand out and talk back to the little clip you just saw. From the evaluation we did learn that there was a clear eye-opener and appreciation to focus on the other half. Although we had to explain many, many times why we were not focusing on those who needed to use and have toilets, I do think we made it that change to say it's not only their problem, it's everybody's problem. And that was one piece that came out from research that was picked up by people. The other thing that was really interesting and got picked up, and I think that was the biggest achievement we wanted to have, is that out of the topic of open defecation, which isn't really a topic that's being talked about that much, the term itself is not very appealing either, it's a very technical term, but we did see that every time there was a mention of the campaign of Poo to the Loo, there were four other mentions online in that same conversation around open defecation. And that sounds simple, but that was actually all we wanted to achieve at that very first campaign, is just to get people to talk about it. As it was saying at the end of that screen, you have to make a stink to actually make the stink go away. So we felt we did really achieve that. We learned a lot of other lessons around this campaign as well, and we're taking this now to the next level with a much larger initiative called Team Swatch, which is still focusing on the same issue, but using sports popularity and connecting the dots between demand generation, social change, and policy change as well. So I can't tell you the successes of that campaign yet. That's in the next 2 years, but it's based on the same concept and based on Poo to the Loo as well. I want to share that.
Thank you. We're doing wonderfully in terms of time. I'd like to introduce now Vandana Mehra. She is currently serving as the Regional Communications Specialist at the World Bank. She is from Delhi University, an alumna of Delhi University, and has been associated with the World Bank since 1999. Vandana advises governments of Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan in the area of water and sanitation. She helps them devise roadmap for strategic communications and consultations with various stakeholders. This includes assistance in building the government's capacity to share and disseminate information and to communicate with its stakeholders. She also assists the government in providing training, contributes to capacity building efforts in water and sanitation for regional media, politicians, and leads activities that contribute to advocate for inclusion of communication in all projects. She is currently assisting the government in its flagship program, the Swachh Bharat Gramin campaign, the Clean India campaign. Vandana, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vimla, and good afternoon, everybody.
So following on Caroline's great talk, I too am going to be focusing a bit today on rural sanitation, actually Swachh Bharat, but I'm working more on rural sanitation. And we are doing a lot of work around communications for sanitation, both urban and rural actually, but today I'm going to be focusing a little bit more also on the role of research in the campaigns. We are all doing a lot of campaigns, but I'd like to talk a little bit about the research. So I'm not going to go through too much of sanitation, what it is. Caroline has also already given a lot of these facts. All of you are reading the newspapers, you're all in the development field. You all know what sanitation means in India today. There is no avoiding this topic anymore. It might seem like it is an everyday subject. That is it. It is an everyday subject, and we all have to deal with this every day. But the enormity of the subject, I'm sure, is now well known to all of you. Yet, there are facts that we forget. There are many, many facts, and I'm just putting up a few for you, that almost 23% of girls drop out of school because they do not have a toilet. 1,000 children approximately under the age of 5 die daily due to diarrhea caused by poor sanitation. This also has a direct impact on nutrition and stunting, which are loads of, just go Google those studies, and you will find that there's so much of information available online. And there's a lot of work being done on that also. So, of course, there's a lot of impact on India's economy also due to poor sanitation, and 1.5 trillion can be added if we had good or adequate sanitation within the country. So those are reasons for why we should be investing in sanitation. A study done by the World Bank, my unit, which is called the Water and Sanitation Program, we did a study which says that a staggering 2.5 trillion each year is the cost to India due to poor sanitation. And that's almost 6.4% of India's GDP. And if this were to be reversed, there would be a lot of good impacts on water, welfare, and tourism. So moving away from the facts, just take a look at this graph. That's our tourism. So that's something that India really tops in. In the country, in the world, we have no competition here. Absolutely none. That's it. It's almost 60% of our population, over 60% of our population has to defecate in the open or chooses to defecate in the open. So there's a difference between the two. Are toilets being made? Yes, possibly yes. The government has put in a lot of money over the last 20, 25 years to construct what we know as latrines, and for the rural population, these are being constructed. But are they being used is the big question. And the answer is unfortunately no. So it's not a question of, and there are many reasons for why they are not being used. One, of course, is habit. We are hearing this word a lot in the last couple of years. Habit, आदत नहीं है, अच्छा नहीं लगता है, हवा चाहिए, घूमना अच्छा लगता है. So these are questions of habit. And a lot of us in this room especially are young urban people who may not even understand what this means, because we have, me included, I'm not young, but me included, have grown up with a working toilet in the house. That's what we were born with. But there are a lot of people out there, that's the number, that big red graph, who have not been born with toilets. And this is not their habit. They don't think of it even as, they even call it to say कि हमारा culture नहीं है, which is something that has become the norm. It's become a norm for them. So like Caroline mentioned earlier on, that it's so easily accepted. Even in urban India, we see a lot of defecation in the open. We do turn a blind eye to it, or we just don't think about it or look there. Somehow we wear blinkers. It's something that doesn't hurt us. We just walk past it. So when it's so easily accepted, it's a practice that just continues on, and there is no break to it. Yet our studies and our research is showing that there are a lot of young girls and women especially who find life, open defecation, a burden, a huge burden, and this tells on their well-being. So let's talk about how, and by the way, sanitation, for all those, some of you may know that sanitation is a state subject. So let's see how low-performing states are doing. They meet construction targets. And while in those particular states, there may be a very weak political buy-in. in the last year, the Prime Minister of this country has changed the landscape of political buy-in for sanitation by making Swachh Bharat a national priority. But before he made it a national priority, it wasn't so with the states. There are weak institutional arrangements which continue, there's low capacity, and it's a lot of it is construction linked, and hence it's sort of driven by numbers, that this district needs to have maybe 1 lakh toilets this month or in a year, or this state needs to cover this many numbers. So constructing of toilets has been going on for decades and will, I guess, continue. The question now, and in our current scenario, is usage, and that requires behavior change. So, you know, when toilets constructed means that you get toilets like this. Have you seen these kind of toilets which are constructed but not used for many other purposes? I haven't put up a picture over here because sometimes it actually angers people, but I have seen 2 toilets in Maharashtra which are used as puja rooms. Yes, because that is possibly the only room that they have which is pakka. So all they do is, they don't use the toilet, it's not a used toilet, they just cover the toilet with a slab of stone, and it's that room in the house which is a pakka kamra, so it's not going to go bad. Mostly people use it for grains, almost everybody uses it for grains and for storing uplas, the cow dung cakes that they're going to, because they don't get wet. But do they use it for the purpose it is intended for? No. Because this is something that has been given to them by some sarkar man came or some NGO came and constructed this without explaining or making them go through the paces of why it is needed. High performers do it differently. They try and do collective behavior change, which means that it is not construction driven, but it's backed up with much more. A whole service value chain, a whole sanitation value chain is in place. So how do we change sanitation behaviors? This is really what I would like to spend a few minutes on this. How we do it is that we do, at the bank, we try and do a lot of formative research, and then we do communications for sanitation. This is a very nice picture of a very cute baby. As you can see, it's a black and white picture. It's really from the time that I was about this age. Now I'm just looking in this room here in front, and I'm seeing a lot of young faces in front of me. So I'd like to do a little poll about who would be approximately over 40 in this room. So my hand goes up first. Okay, well, that's not too many people here, but a few people. So most of us who are over 40 will remember a time in this country when everybody could smoke anywhere they wanted to. You could get into an Indian Airlines plane, that was the only plane that was available, and you could anywhere in the plane. My father was in the army, so we used to do quite a bit of travel by air, and I remember he was a smoker, and he could smoke anywhere in the plane. When I was in college, when I finished my 3rd year of college, I had about 2 months of holidays, and my mother decided to pack me off to my nanny's house, who used to live in Bombay, and that was the first time that Indian Airlines had divided the plane up into half, and you could not smoke in the plane anymore. Smokers had to go and sit in the last 3 seats. And this was new, and everybody was laughing and was saying, oh, this will never work. In India, this will never work. This will not happen in India. These things don't happen in India. And that particular plane that I was on, that Indian Airlines was the only way you could fly to Bombay in any case. So that particular plane that I was on, I was very lucky because one of the reigning superstars of that time, his name was Rajesh Khanna. The over 40s will know about him. He was on that plane, and he was a smoker. He was a chain smoker. That is something I learned about him in that particular flight. And he was told to go and sit in the last 3 seats because he wanted to smoke. So if you wanted to smoke, you had to go sit in the last 3 seats. From that day till today, for the ones who did not pick up their hands just now, I don't think you can even imagine smoking in a plane today. So that behavior change has happened in us, in our minds. Even for the ones who are smokers in this room, I will not ask you to pick up your hands, but you know how things have changed in the last 20 to 30 years. From being able to smoke anywhere you liked, today, as a smoker in most countries, you're almost a petty criminal. You know, go out, go to that corner, be 20 meters away from this building. Things have changed because social norms have changed. Smoking is not that acceptable in public. People will tell you, I mean, in my own house, I ask people now to move out into the garden or the lawn or the balcony, and you cannot just smoke in the rooms anymore. But this was not so 20 to 30 years back. Seat belts, in the States, 40 years back, there was no question of anybody wearing a seat belt. Today, you are just put into jail straight away or fined. And of course, even criminals, you can see this in all your Bollywood movies and all your serials today on television. Even when criminals are making a getaway, they pull for the seat belt. It's just ingrained in you. So even if you're fleeing cops, you're still pulling for the seat belt. So that is change that has happened. But it takes a couple of generations, but it has to start sometime. And I hope we are starting for sanitation. We are starting in our country now. So these are the reasons for why we need sanitation communication, because that will address the social norms and behavior determinants, and demand needs to be created. The fact is that we need to create the demand. Just like we need to sell other products, we need to sell sanitation and create a demand for it. We are so behind in our sanitation behaviors that this needs to be done just like marketing for any other product. And for this, evidence-based and a planned process is what is the need of the hour today. So these are the sanitation behaviors that we identify as positive sanitation behaviors. You need to end open defecation, which means everybody needs to use a toilet. It could be a shared toilet, a community toilet, or an individual toilet. You need to build and use them. Eventually keep upgrading your toilets. For those of you who are interested in the subject, come to me sometime and I will show you the kind of toilets people are building in the state of Punjab. They are they're great toilets. You need to maintain them, clean them, and you need to manage children's excreta. So these are the main sanitation behaviors. Our formative research answers mainly 4 questions. What is your target audience? What are the facilitators and barriers that impact sanitation behaviors? What is the ideal toilet? This is important, and our research is showing again and again that nobody wants to be forced into that 3x3 latrine, as it's called. People want choices. They want to decide whether they want a big size toilet, small size toilet, in their house, outside their house, tiles, no tiles, fan, light, just like you would like your toilet designed in a house that you own. Everybody wants it. Just because somebody is categorized as double quotes poor doesn't mean they can be forced into a room that is really, impossible to defecate in. And eventually, what are the most suitable vehicles of communication? TV advertising may be very, very attractive, but is it going to reach that person who may have a television in his or her house in some village in Bihar or Uttar Pradesh, but no electricity for 12 days? Our examples say that chief wage earners, which are men, are the decision makers, but youth and women play a very important role in decision making. This is specifically some insights from Bihar and Jharkhand, where if a man had extra money, he would spend it on a toilet as his 5th priority. So he has 4 competing priorities before he would think of making a toilet. While a woman in Bihar and Jharkhand would make a toilet a 4th priority, but it's definitely not in the first 2 for either a man or a woman in Jharkhand and Bihar. And actually, it's almost the same in Rajasthan. In Rajasthan, it's a little higher for women, but for men, it's almost the same there too. So that's how people would use their money on. This is our research of over a year that has shown this. In Uttar Pradesh, it's for women, it's coming as number 3, and for men, it's number 6. They have many, many other competing priorities before they think of building a toilet and, of course, using it. Yep. So this is my last slide, but I'd like to say that people do talk about the fact that the issue is so huge, it is enormous. Yes, it is. But also to just point out to you that every couple of years, the government does manage 30 million people together for a few days on Kumbh, where arrangements are made for sanitation. So it is possible. Everybody just needs to come together. Communications will play a very important role in it. And we are trying to make sure that the message does get out, but it is possible, and I think everybody just has to play their role in it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vandana. A last speaker for today is Sonali Khan. Sonali leads the India operations of Breakthrough, and I'm sure most of you know about Breakthrough. Over the past 8 years, she has led Breakthrough's key campaigns, In her current role as the Vice President, Sonali has been instrumental in expanding Breakthrough's reach and has been actively developing support for the organization. She has played a key role in extending the work of Breakthrough to focus on issues of early marriage and sex-selective elimination. Before taking over as Breakthrough's India Country Director and then the Vice President, Sonali headed the India office's media and communication team. Also, an accomplished business journalist, she has produced programs and documentaries for networks, including the BBC World, Star Plus, and CNBC. Sonali has an MPhil in political philosophy from JNU, Delhi.
Thank you, Vimla. And it's always tough to be the last speaker, and after such profound presentations, well, I'll shift the conversation to another issue area, which is also of key concern. When we say that 1 out of every 3 women experience violence, it is everybody's concern. Before I launch into actually talking about communication and how you can use it to address this sometimes intractable and rather complex problem, I'd like you to watch this video. This video actually picks on some of the fabulous concepts and terms that have been used this afternoon: culture, social change, norm change, behavior change, collective action, all these lovely words which we all need to move and push if we want to see any community move towards either better sanitation, better life, avoiding problems like bonded labor, and in this case, discrimination of women and girls.
बेटी चलो चलो यहाँ से
बधाई हो
This video even leaves me very emotionally moved, because when you travel to Haryana, there's a palpable absence of women in all places, whether it's school, whether it's in the streets, whether it's in the workspace. Of course, today there is really, the government has launched the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao campaign, which is taking on the skewed sex ratio in a very dramatic and targeted manner. And Haryana is one of the states where the program has launched. It's launched in 100 districts. Now they are planning to include 61 districts in the next phase of the program, where clear mandate has been given to all district collectors to shift the sex ratio by 50 points. And when they mean by sex ratio, they mean sex ratio at birth. To shift the sex ratio will take a long time. But they are trying to target and say that we want at least higher births of girls. Now, this is the target that the government has set. I was in a meeting recently and they shared some of the findings of how this campaign has done so far. Some of these districts has shown a lot of change for the better, even 200 points improvement. But those that have done badly have shown 200-point decline. It's a very difficult and tall task. Changing the mindset is what we are all here pushing for. For a number of years, a lot has been done on addressing this issue in some of the most patriarchal and difficult terrains to work in, including Haryana. Breakthrough works in 4 districts in Haryana. Jhajjar, which has the worst sex ratio, Panipat, where the Prime Minister launched the Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao campaign, Sonipat, and Rohtak. So we are in 4 districts in communities, and we have launched this campaign, Mission Hazar, very much in the same, it launched about 3 years ago, and then now, of course, we have Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, which hopefully will strengthen the campaign. So the idea of using communication to shift the conversation has been very critical in this campaign, from moving from just looking at the act of feticide to linking the whole act of sex selection to discriminating girls, to daughter neglect. That has been something that has been a big movement in the last, I think, year and more. We have partnered with UNFPA to really build out a communication guide, which is available, and if anybody is interested, we can happily send them over, to really understand what is the deep linkage of really talking about sex selection and linking it with one of the aspects is, of course, Beti Padhao, but then there is nutrition, there is education, and even the right to safer abortion. So in all of this enthusiasm, the whole perspective should rest on women's rights. So I'd like to also mention that when we talk about communication for big impact, what is this big impact that we so desire? Does it take into account rights of people whose life this is impacting, and in this case, women and girls? So I think it's very critical to position communication in that light. So while we are talking about sex selection, we are really grateful that yes, the narrative framework has moved from one of just victim, from just looking at it as an act of feticide, to now looking at it as women and girls, what are their rights. But we are still, and I will reference here some of the tough ones. Are we addressing structural and systemic problems? Are we talking about property rights for women? I haven't heard that yet. Are we talking about greater safety and security for women? I mean, that has become a big buzzword now, but really, what is the action? Year on year, if we look at state-level budgets, there's very little allocation. I mean, now we are hearing about the One-Stop Crisis Center. So when we talk about communication for big impact, how does it then connect with the whole package is very critical. So while Breakthrough is using communication, and I will circle back to that, as a very important tool of agenda setting. So I think one thing we must be very humble about understanding what is the role of communication. It cannot do everything. One of its primary role is actually, yes, it is to really mobilize people for action, That is one role. It is also where there is no belief or there is complete denial that there is this problem, it can definitely agenda set or push the agenda much more strongly, whether it is a health or sanitation, whether it is other forms. It has to be backed up by very strong on-ground mobilization, which again uses communication in different ways. But yes, I mean, communication today has become a very stretchable term, and it can encompass everything, but I would, hesitate to do that. So I really think that one of the key things about communication is that it can really advance a way of thinking, it can shift discourses, and in, I think, today's age, when you have social, you have digital, and all kinds of media, I think the biggest thing that communication can do is be inclusive. I think that is something which we sometimes forget, that is it including everyone in the conversation, the most marginalized who don't have access to mainline media, are we using techniques and tools to reach them? So I think these are some of the challenges that when we use communication, we are absolutely faced by. So while as really a strong advocate for communication, it really helps us scale and reach large numbers, it helps us engage and talk to people and hear back from them. But it takes a lot of effort to push for real change to happen, and therefore communication is a strategy. It's a powerful strategy, it's a powerful tool for advocacy, and it should be used in healthy strategic combination with other tools as well, which could be other forms of community mobilization, training, research. I think a lot of the partners on the table spoke about different aspects of this. So I won't belabor the point. I'd love to end with a film. Initially, I thought I'll not speak at all and show you a whole host of films because the speakers before me did such a fabulous job of talking on communication. But I thought it'd be nice to just front and center the issue. I'll show you a clip that is from our current campaign, which is against sexual harassment. It focuses on conversations around harassment because of all the public conversation that has happened after the Nirbhaya rape case of aggravated assault. So much has gone on. But does anyone really understand what is going on in the home space? And I remember having this very interesting conversation with a B.Tech, a guy who had come to our office, and he was pitching for one of the apps we want to develop. And he asked a very naive question, and it sort of put me on my back foot, and I was really alarmed for a minute. He said, Shonali, I only know what it means to respect my mother or sister. I have never been taught how to respect women at large. So I only know what to do in interaction with my mother and sister, but am I supposed to take that framework and apply it to women I meet in the office, women I meet in the street, or what is it? Because my relationship is not the same. Can you please explain this to me? So I was thinking, but isn't this very simple? You just need to respect everybody. You need to treat them with dignity. You need to allow them access to spaces which men take as privilege. But he honestly wanted to discuss it. And I think that's my question of openness and inclusion. How are we able to create spaces where people can ask questions without fear and have a discussion? I think communication is actually the basis of how change will ever happen. But I would add to it two words that I hold very dear, is communication being open and non-judgmental. If we want big impact to happen, especially when we are working with young people, if you are judgmental, the first thing that will happen is they will turn away. So we cannot look down ever on anyone. So I'd leave you with some deep thinking around creating communication for social change, which is so critical, and we're all excited. It's a buzzword. It was not a buzzword 10 years ago. Neither was social change, neither was cultural norms. None of these were buzzwords as they are today. But I think in our happiness of, joining these buzzwords and picking them up, we should be very conscious of what they imply and stick to certain fundamental values so that we always create openness and also are inclusive. So I'll end with this video. How do I get to it?
ये टोन चेंज कर दो।
क्यों मॉम?
बदल दो।
पर क्यों?
क्योंकि रोज जब मैं ऑफिस जाती हूँ कुछ लोग मुझे देखकर ऐसे ही सीटी मारते हैं और मैं सीटियों से थक गई हूँ। Share your story with your son. Don't let what happened to you happen to another woman. To share your story, click on this link.
So thank you so much. Just leaving you with this thought that social change doesn't happen when you push things down people's throat. They reject it, they oppose it. The idea is to implant a doubt that what they are doing is not right. And hopefully change will happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonali. Always Janta is last. So you have 7 minutes or 8 minutes to pose your questions or comments. Please put up your hand and we'll try to circulate the mic so that, yep. Somebody. Please keep your questions or comments very short so that others can also.
For all the experts. Wanted to have your opinion on coercive methods of behavior change communication. Ms. Mehra, the example that you said about smoking, I've been smoking for the last 10 years. I am still smoking. I haven't quit, although all those coercive techniques have been, they are there in place. Yes, I have avoided using or smoking at public space. Number two, your opinion on using children as agents of change for behavior change communication, please. Thank you.
Should we take the questions together? Yeah. Can we have a few more questions? Yeah. The person at the back there. And after this, one more perhaps, and then we'll try to address all of it.
Hello, I'm Smita, and my question is, the one case in point, but it's definitely not specifically about that ad, is the Vidya Balan ads we see on TV on sanitation and toilets. Now, I often wonder, and I'm not speaking for one side or the other, but sometimes in communicating very strongly about one developmental goal or, one kind of an intervention, we strengthen some other stereotypes. We affect some other developmental, agenda. So, for example, we say we are, sort of sticking to the stereotype of large and izzat with women because we know that that's what will work. So, I don't know where's the thin line. What do you think? What do you all think? Is that a good way of approaching one issue at the cost of another? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? One more? Anybody else? No? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for these questions. Actually, they're really, really insightful. The challenge of, reaffirming stereotypes has always been a problem. So I think in many communication, while they try to push a new social agenda, they will reaffirm stereotypes. So this has been a big challenge, and I think you're very right that why should all the burden of change be on women? If you have seen what's happened with the microfinance sector, there are so many areas this has happened where the burden of change, or even in terms of using contraception, all of the burden comes on women. So I think this is a very valid point, and sometimes what we do not take into consideration while building communication is the unintended consequence of the communication. And sometimes that is far harmful than the intended consequence. And you may take an informed decision, and you may take an informed risk, but it's a choice you make. And like I was saying, that while you're pushing very hard for tackling the sex ratio, but in no way should you not be mindful of women's right to bodily integrity, women's right to her own sexual health, and whatever that means, whether it be the right to safer abortion. So I'm just saying that let's be mindful, and I think that's the point you really wanted to make, and that's the question that I would take on. And I would just take on one more point about coercive method of social change. You know, it has never worked. And that's been a fact of point. I think when you say cigarette smoking, it's not all been coercive. There has been, if you look over a period of time, there has been just so much going on around talking about health. And in fact, in cigarette smoking, there's been direct correlation on health and, scientific evidence that has been built out. Even I still remember, I think one story when I was in famous JNU, I still remember that these girls had come into the hostel and they were promoting MS cigarettes. I don't know if any of you 40 plus would remember that. So they had come and they thought that they would talk to, very liberal JNU hostel students, and especially women, if they would like to pick up smoking MS cigarettes. So I still remember that. So, even how much has gone in actually to counter all those values that are attached to cigarette smoking. And I think today, there's a bigger challenge is actually smoking non-filtered cigarettes, if you think about it, and what happens in rural India is the bidi smoking. So I think we have to really look at, one, I completely agree with you that a lot has happened in the urban environment, but as such, the problem is somewhere else sometimes. And I think that has to also be identified. I don't think I've answered your question completely, but I do agree that sometimes coercion does not work, and especially on issues that are there, which the kind of issues that we tend to work on. So it's very critical to build awareness and collective action, and I would push for that.
If I may just add something, it's also sometimes we need to think when we are communicating, we actually end up insulting people. And that's again the Vidya Balan thing. Lots of young people get so angry when they listen to it when I'm driving with them on the roads on FM, saying that she'd prefer to talk to a fly. Maybe that was not intended, but a lot of people said, what does she think of herself? So we need to really perhaps look at communication, not just all the time looking at how to go down there and convert everybody to change their behaviors. What about all the people on the top and in the middle? Like Caroline said, what about all of us? Those who have many things, how do we become better communicators and advocates? Perhaps we need to think about that seriously, that behavior change communication is not only going down to the community level and telling them and making them change. I am not at all belittling the fact that a lot of action is needed at the community level. It has to be both ways. It has to be vertical and lateral. It has to be everybody's business. And we have to think seriously how we can communicate and become better communicators where we live, where we work, where we walk the streets, where we don't walk the streets. And I think some of the things that the speakers spoke about, I'd just like to mention it again as some takeaway perhaps for all of us, in that it is everybody's business and a problem for resolution. It is the power of voice and action. It is a question of dialogue, not talking down to and not telling people. Earlier it used to be information, education, communication. Now it's turned to social behavior change communication, but the actual method hasn't changed. And I think that in most cases, and that has to be continuous and consistent. Those who have to become the communicators so that the rights issues can be taken up seriously. After all, it's all a question of human rights. And how structures and systemic problems have to be set and addressed. Who sets the agenda is something that we all have to be aware of. And we have to have research and evidence for this purpose. It's a big game. And to make that big impact, all of us must become better communicators. Maybe that's what we have to teach our children. Thank you. Thank you all very much.